On a crisp winter morning in Chicago, Officer Ethan Carter woke up to the familiar sound of the city coming to life, honking cars, distant sirens, and the soft hum of his wife, Anna, preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Their modest suburban home was a testament to the life they had built together over the last decade. Ethan, 35, had always been a picture of stability, a dedicated police officer who took pride in protecting his city and a devoted husband who cherished Anna, his high school sweetheart. As he sipped his coffee at the kitchen table, Ethan looked at Anna, who was humming softly as she flipped pancakes. With her warm smile and nurturing presence, Anna embodied the perfect partner, supportive, loyal, and understanding. They had plans for their future, a larger home, starting a family, and perhaps a vacation to the mountains that Anna had been dreaming of for years. Life was steady, predictable, and comfortable. That morning, Ethan kissed Anna goodbye and headed to the precinct, where the day would bring an unexpected change. At the Chicago Police Department's 12th precinct, Ethan walked into the bustling station, nodding at familiar faces and exchanging brief greetings with colleagues. The department was like a second family to him, filled with camaraderie and trust forged through years of shared danger and triumphs. It was there that he met Officer Laura Hayes for the first time. Freshly transferred from another precinct, Laura was introduced as his new partner. She was 28 years old, with a sharp, determined gaze and an undeniable air of confidence. Her auburn hair was neatly tied back, and her uniform was pressed to perfection, a reflection of her meticulous nature. "Officer Carter," Laura said, extending her hand firmly. "I've heard a lot about you. Looking forward to working together." Ethan shook her hand and smiled. "Welcome to the team. I hope you're ready for long nights and bad coffee." Laura chuckled, and just like that, the ice was broken. The first few weeks of their partnership were marked by a natural rhythm. They quickly fell into sync during patrols, responding to calls with precision and efficiency. Laura was not only ambitious, but also deeply empathetic, often going out of her way to comfort victims or de-escalate tense situations. Ethan found himself admiring her passion and resilience. Their bond grew during long hours on the job. Conversations during stakeouts drifted beyond work to their personal lives. Ethan shared stories about Anna and his dreams of starting a family, while Laura talked about her struggles, balancing her demanding career with her own aspirations. Though Ethan remained professional, he couldn't ignore the spark of camaraderie and mutual understanding forming between them. It was subtle but undeniable, a connection that felt refreshing after years of routine and predictability in his life. Unbeknownst to Ethan, this seemingly innocent connection would soon spiral into a tangled web of emotions and consequences, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shatter everything he held dear. Several months into their partnership, Ethan Carter and Laura Hayes had developed a connection that extended far beyond their professional duties. Their shifts together were filled with shared stories, mutual laughter, and an unspoken understanding of the burdens that came with wearing the badge. Ethan found himself looking forward to the days they patrolled together, the long hours feeling lighter with Laura by his side. At first, it seemed harmless. They talked about everything: difficult cases, career goals, and the challenges of maintaining balance in their personal lives. Laura often expressed admiration for Ethan's ability to manage a stable marriage despite the demands of his job, while Ethan, in turn, admired her tenacity and drive. Their conversations began to extend beyond the squad car. Late-night phone calls became a routine, with Laura seeking Ethan's advice and Ethan finding solace in her easy understanding. What started as camaraderie was slowly morphing into something more intimate, an emotional bond neither was willing to fully acknowledge. It was a sweltering summer night when the precinct celebrated a major victory, the successful takedown of a drug trafficking ring that had plagued the city for years. Ethan and Laura had played pivotal roles in the operation, earning them recognition from their superiors. The team decided to unwind at a local bar, a rare opportunity to let their guard down. As the night wore on and the drinks flowed, Ethan and Laura found themselves sitting at a quiet corner table, away from the boisterous laughter and clinking glasses of their colleagues. The dim lighting cast a warm glow over Laura's face as she shared stories about her childhood, her voice carrying a mix of vulnerability and strength that drew Ethan in. "You know," Laura said, swirling her glass of whiskey, "I never really had anyone believe in me the way you do. You make me feel like I belong here." Ethan smiled, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long. "You're a great cop, Laura. You don't need anyone to tell you that you just are." The space between them seemed to shrink, the buzz of the room fading into the background. A moment of silence passed before Ethan leaned in, hesitating just long enough for Laura to meet him halfway. Their lips met in a kiss that was equal parts hesitation and urgency, the culmination of months of unspoken feelings. When they pulled away, reality crashed down on them both. "We shouldn't have done that," Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I know," Laura whispered, her eyes searching his for an answer to a question neither dared to ask. Despite their initial guilt, the kiss marked the beginning of a secret affair that neither could bring themselves to end. The long hours they spent together on patrol became more charged, their conversations laced with unspoken tension and stolen glances. They were careful to keep their relationship hidden. Texts were deleted as soon as they were sent, and meetings outside of work were scheduled in the most inconspicuous places. Ethan became adept at covering his tracks, using his late shifts as an excuse to spend time with Laura. Laura, meanwhile, wrestled with her own internal conflict. She knew Ethan was married, but her feelings for him overpowered her sense of right and wrong. She convinced herself that their connection was different, that it wasn't just an affair, it was something deeper. For Ethan, the affair became a dangerous escape from the monotony of his life. He still loved Anna, or at least the idea of her, but with Laura, he felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Yet, the weight of his deception loomed over him, a silent reminder that their secret could destroy everything. As the weeks turned into months, their affair intensified, pulling them further into a web of lies and betrayals. Neither realized that their actions were setting the stage for a tragedy that would leave their lives irreparably shattered. The autumn chill had begun to settle over Chicago, and the precinct was buzzing with the usual chaos of police work. Ethan Carter had just returned to his desk after a grueling shift when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Laura Hayes, asking him to meet her at a diner they often frequented during late-night patrols. "Can't this wait?" He typed back, exhaustion etched into every fiber of his being. "No," came her reply. "I need to talk to you. It's important." When Ethan arrived at the diner, Laura was already seated in their usual booth. Her face was pale, and her hands nervously gripped the mug of coffee in front of her. Ethan slid into the seat across from her, immediately sensing the tension. "What's going on?" he asked, concern mingling with irritation. Laura took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she finally spoke. "Ethan, I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing to catch up. For a moment, he could only blink, his usual composure completely shattered. "You're sure?" he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Laura nodded, tears welling up in her brown eyes. "I've taken 3 tests." "There's no doubt." Ethan leaned back in the booth, running a hand over his face. A storm of emotions churned inside him: shock, guilt, fear, and, to his surprise, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. "This can't be happening," he murmured, more to himself than to Laura. Ethan's thoughts turned immediately to Anna, his wife of 10 years. He pictured her warm smile, the way she always waited up for him after late shifts, trusting him implicitly. The betrayal he had kept hidden was bad enough, but now there was a child, a living, undeniable proof of his infidelity. Ethan, Laura's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. What are we going to do? Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice, as if the weight of their secret might leak into the air around them. We can't tell anyone. Not yet. I need time to figure this out. Laura's expression hardened. Time to figure what out? This isn't something we can just hide forever. I know that, Ethan said, his tone sharper than he intended. But I can't just drop this on Anna. Not now. I need to think. For weeks, Laura kept the pregnancy a secret, as Ethan had begged her to. But with each passing day, her frustration grew. She had hoped Ethan's initial shock would give way to action, that he would step up and take responsibility. Instead, he seemed paralyzed, caught between his loyalty to Anna and his obligation to Laura. Laura felt abandoned, her excitement about the baby overshadowed by Ethan's indecision. She began to doubt his promises, wondering if he ever intended to leave his wife. You can't keep running from this, Ethan, Laura said during one of their heated arguments. They were parked in a secluded spot near the precinct, far from prying eyes. I'm not running, Ethan shot back. I'm trying to protect everyone, Anna, you, the baby. Do you know what this would do to all of us if it came out? It's already out, Laura countered, her voice breaking. I'm the one living with this, Ethan, not you. Every day, I'm reminded of what's happening while you get to go home and pretend everything's fine. Ethan clenched the steering wheel, his jaw tightening. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he was just as tormented by the situation as she was, but the words felt hollow. As the weeks passed, the strain between them deepened. Laura, once so vibrant and confident, began to withdraw, consumed by a mix of anger and sadness. Ethan's attempts to reassure her felt increasingly futile. He hated himself for the pain he was causing her, but felt powerless to make a choice that wouldn't destroy someone he cared about. In the shadow of their growing rift, the secret they shared became a ticking time bomb, threatening to detonate and obliterate their lives. Ethan's world, already fragile, was teetering on the edge, and he had no idea how close he was to losing everything. Carter household had always been a sanctuary of trust and love, or so Anna Carter believed. It was a quiet evening when she noticed Ethan's phone buzzing incessantly on the kitchen counter. He was in the shower, and the messages, all from a contact labeled LL, caught her attention. Anna hesitated. She had never been the type to invade Ethan's privacy, but something about the frequency and urgency of the messages gnawed at her. Against her better judgment, she unlocked his phone, her heart pounding as she read the words on the screen. We need to talk. You can't keep avoiding this. The baby isn't going away, Ethan. I can't do this alone. Anna felt the ground shift beneath her. Her hands trembled as she pieced together the fragments of a story she didn't want to believe. When Ethan stepped out of the bathroom, towel slung over his shoulder, he found Anna sitting on the edge of the bed, his phone clutched tightly in her hand. Her face was a mixture of fury and heartbreak. Who's'll, Ethan? She demanded, her voice sharp and cold. Ethan froze. He had always prided himself on staying composed under pressure, but the look in Anna's eyes pierced through him. Anna, it's not what you think. Don't you dare lie to me, she cut him off, standing up and shoving the phone into his chest. I read the messages. Tell me the truth, Ethan. Cornered, Ethan sank onto the bed, running a hand through his damp hair. Her name is Laura. She's my partner. He hesitated, the weight of his confession nearly choking him. We've been seeing each other. Anna's breath hitched, her worst fears confirmed. How long? Since the summer, Ethan admitted, his voice barely audible. But it didn't mean anything, Anna. I swear. Didn't mean anything? Anna's voice cracked, her anger giving way to tears. You've been lying to me for months, Ethan. How could you do this to me? To us? Ethan reached for her, but she pulled away. I made a mistake, he said desperately. I know I messed up, but I love you, Anna. I don't want to lose you. Anna stared at him, her mind racing. She had loved Ethan since they were teenagers, building a life together based on trust and partnership. Now, that foundation felt irreparably shattered. I can't even look at you right now, she said, her voice trembling. If you want to fix this, you need to end it. Completely. No more lies. No more secrets. Ethan nodded, relief flooding through him even as guilt clawed at his chest. I'll end it, he promised. I'll make it right. Anna's gaze hardened. You'd better. Because if I ever find out you've lied to me again, we're done, Ethan. She stormed out of the room, leaving Ethan alone with the crushing weight of his choices. True to his word, or so he made it seem, Ethan met with Laura the next day. They parked in an empty lot under the cover of night, the tension between them palpable. It's over, Ethan said, avoiding her gaze. Anna knows. She gave me an ultimatum, and I have to fix my marriage. Laura stared at him, her hands instinctively moving to her stomach. So, that's it? You're just walking away? What about me? What about the baby? I'm not walking away, Ethan said, his voice cracking. But I can't be with you. Not like this. Laura's eyes filled with tears. You're a coward, Ethan. You want to play the hero at home while leaving me to deal with everything alone. Is that really who you are? Ethan didn't respond, his silence speaking volumes. Despite his promises to Anna, Ethan found it impossible to sever ties with Laura completely. Their relationship, once fueled by passion and excitement, had transformed into something darker and more complex. The guilt of his betrayal battled with his growing attachment to Laura and their unborn child. He began sneaking away to see her, their meetings now tinged with desperation and secrecy. Each rendezvous felt like a game of Russian roulette, the risk of being caught growing with every lie he told Anna. Anna, meanwhile, struggled to trust Ethan again. She monitored his movements, her instincts telling her that something was still amiss. Their once perfect marriage had become a battlefield, with Anna's suspicions clashing against Ethan's attempts to maintain the facade of a devoted husband. The unraveling of their lives had begun, and none of them could foresee the tragedy that lay ahead. Laura Hayes sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, the silence broken only by the occasional hum of traffic outside. Her once clear future was now clouded by uncertainty. Ethan had promised her so much, yet he remained tethered to his wife, Anna, leaving Laura to navigate her pregnancy alone. As her frustration grew, Laura's mind raced with possibilities. She was tired of waiting and even more tired of being a secret. The whispers of her colleagues and the judgmental stares she feared felt suffocating, even if they were only in her imagination. That evening, after another ignored call from Ethan, Laura made a decision. She typed a message. If you don't tell Anna everything by the end of this week, I will. And I'll make sure your precinct knows too. She hesitated for a moment before hitting send. When Ethan received Laura's text, he was sitting in his car outside a convenience store, the glow of the screen casting a ghostly light over his face. He read the message repeatedly, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. If Laura exposed their affair, It wouldn't just destroy his marriage, it would obliterate his career. The precinct prided itself on upholding a code of ethics, and a scandal like this would be unforgivable. Worse, Anna would be humiliated, and the trust he had spent a decade building with her would be irreparably shattered. Ethan's paranoia grew with each passing day. Every glance from a colleague felt like an accusation, every conversation at home like a veiled threat. He began to unravel, consumed by the fear that his life as he knew it was about to implode. On January 5, Ethan drove to Laura's apartment after his shift. The streets were slick with melting snow, the bitter cold matching the storm brewing inside him. He couldn't avoid her anymore, not with her ultimatum hanging over his head. Laura opened the door, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. "You finally decided to show up," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Laura, we need to talk," Ethan said, his tone tense. She crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "Talk, or are you here to make more empty promises?" Ethan rubbed his temples, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "I can't have you threatening me like this. Do you understand what's at stake? If Anna finds out, if the precinct finds out, I'll lose everything. And what about me?" Laura shot back, her voice rising. "I am carrying your child, Ethan. You think I care about your reputation when I'm the one left to deal with this mess?" The argument escalated quickly, their voices echoing through the small apartment. Ethan tried to calm her down, but Laura was relentless, her anger boiling over. "If you won't do the right thing, I will," she said, grabbing her phone. "I'm done being your dirty little secret." Ethan lunged forward, his hand closing over hers to stop her from dialing. "Don't do this, Laura," he pleaded, "please." But Laura was resolute. "You don't get to control me anymore, Ethan. I'm done being afraid of what you might lose. It's time you faced the consequences." The argument reached its breaking point. In a fit of desperation, Ethan grabbed Laura by the shoulders, shaking her. "You don't understand what you're doing," he shouted, his voice thick with panic. Laura pushed him away, her own anger matching his. "No, Ethan, you don't understand. I'm done protecting you." Something inside Ethan snapped. The fear, guilt, and anger he had been suppressing for months erupted all at once. His hands closed around Laura's neck, and before he fully registered what he was doing, she was struggling beneath his grip. "Stop," she gasped, clawing at his arms. But Ethan, blinded by rage and desperation, didn't let go. Seconds stretched into an eternity before Laura's body went limp. The apartment fell into a deafening silence, broken only by Ethan's ragged breathing. He stumbled back, staring at her lifeless form on the floor, his mind unable to comprehend what had just happened. Ethan's chest heaved as the reality of his actions set in. The woman he had once cared for, the mother of his unborn child, was dead, and he was the one responsible. Panic surged through him. He paced the room, his thoughts racing. He had to act quickly, to cover his tracks. But no matter how hard he tried to focus, one thought screamed louder than the rest. There was no going back. In the aftermath of Laura's death, Ethan stood motionless in her small, sparsely decorated apartment, his mind swirling with disbelief. The reality of what he had done set in like a thick fog, suffocating every rational thought. Panic clenched his chest as he realized the gravity of his situation. Not only had he killed Laura, but he also had to cover his tracks or risk losing everything. Ethan's hands shook as he moved through the apartment. He knew he needed to make the death look like something else, something that wouldn't immediately raise suspicion. His mind raced for a plan, a break-in, a robbery gone wrong. It was simple enough, and he could manipulate the scene in a way that would fit with the few details of their lives they'd shared. He began with the front door. He forced it open with all the subtlety he could muster, careful to make it look like someone had entered the apartment with ill intentions. He rifled through drawers and scattered items around the living room, hoping it would look like an opportunistic thief had been searching for valuables. Next, he moved to the bedroom. Ethan carefully moved Laura's body from the floor and onto the bed, ensuring her position was less obvious in its finality. He rearranged her clothes as though she had been caught off guard during a peaceful evening at home. He considered briefly whether to add any more signs of struggle, but quickly dismissed the idea it might look too forced. The scene had to feel real, not staged. In his mind, he played out the scenario. If anyone were to find the body, they'd assume a robbery gone wrong. Laura had lived alone, and there was no sign of a violent struggle beyond the initial altercation. The apartment was relatively untouched, suggesting that whoever was responsible had been interrupted before they could finish what they came for. It was believable, even if it felt wrong. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. His hands were stained with Laura's blood, and he couldn't wash away the guilt that clung to him. Still, he fought down the rising nausea and pushed forward. By the time the call came through to the precinct, it was well into the night. The discovery of Laura's body sent shockwaves through the department. Her colleagues, many of whom had known her personally, were devastated by the news. The scene was described as a possible homicide, resulting from a botched burglary, but the detectives were already feeling the weight of uncertainty. They had no immediate leads, and nothing seemed to add up. As the department scrambled to secure the crime scene and begin the investigation, Ethan was assigned to lead the case. On the surface, it made sense. He had worked closely with Laura for months, and they had shared personal details of their lives that might offer insight. But deep down, Ethan knew it wasn't an ordinary case. As soon as the decision was made, Ethan felt the pressure mounting. He couldn't afford to let his colleagues connect the dots, especially with how closely his life was tied to the victims. He had to keep the investigation moving forward without raising any red flags. The first day of the investigation was a blur of police interviews, evidence collection, and futile attempts to make sense of the scene. Ethan, now playing the role of investigator, moved methodically through the apartment, taking notes and examining the supposed break-in with a practiced eye. He made sure to give his colleagues enough to work with, just enough to lead them down the path of a botched robbery. He pointed out the disheveled drawers, the broken door, and the missing electronics details that could easily be misinterpreted as signs of theft. As the investigation progressed, Ethan used his position to steer the focus away from any suspicion falling on him. He was careful in his statements, emphasizing how little he knew about the state of Laura's personal life and avoiding anything that might reveal their deeper connection. He never mentioned the pregnancy, knowing full well that any hint of the affair would destroy his already fragile marriage and his career. Behind the scenes, Ethan worked tirelessly to manipulate the evidence. He discreetly disposed of any items that could potentially tie him to Laura's death, including the clothes he had worn the night of the murder, which had small traces of her blood. He wiped down his car and deleted any messages from Laura on his phone. Even the texts threatening to expose their affair were gone, erased with cold precision. But as he buried the evidence, the pressure began to mount. The more he manipulated the case, the more aware he became of the tightrope he was walking. One wrong move, one misstep, and the whole web of lies would come crashing down. Despite his calculated efforts, Ethan couldn't shake the growing paranoia that gnawed at him. He had thought he could outsmart everyone, his colleagues, his wife, even the investigation, but the weight of his actions pressed on him, and the fear of being caught lingered in every shadow. Every step he took felt like he was inching closer to discovery. Ethan, had always prided himself on being in control. But now, with every decision, the walls seemed to close in on him. His nerves were shot. During interviews, he found himself second-guessing every word, every gesture. A stray glance from a fellow officer, a question that seemed too pointed, made his heart race. Could they sense something was off? Could they tell that he was hiding something? Each time he tried to redirect the investigation, he became more convinced that his colleagues were getting closer to the truth. Every bit of evidence he altered only deepened his sense of dread. He began to see suspicion in every face, and his once calm demeanor began to crack. His life, built on years of hard work and dedication, now hung by the thinnest of threads. All it would take was one mistake, one slip-up, and his entire world would unravel. Ethan had grown increasingly paranoid over the weeks since Laura's death. Each morning, he awoke with the constant weight of guilt pressing down on him, and every knock at the door sent his heart racing. Despite his meticulous cover-up, something felt off. He couldn't shake the nagging sensation that he was missing something, one small detail that could unravel everything. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: forensic evidence. While Ethan had worked hard to manipulate the scene and remove anything that might connect him to the murder, he had failed to account for the smallest detail, the type of knot used to tie the shoelaces of Laura's boots. During the initial examination of her body, a forensic specialist noticed that the laces had been tied with a method that was atypical for a robbery or home invasion. The detail was subtle, but it was enough to raise questions. In a routine investigation, it would have been a trivial matter. However, in a case like this, where every piece of evidence mattered, it hinted at something much deeper. Someone who had a personal connection to Laura, someone who had spent a significant amount of time with her, was likely responsible. The knot suggested familiarity, a knowing, intimate gesture. When the forensic team questioned Ethan about the unusual knot, he became defensive, struggling to maintain his composure. The more they probed, the more his responses seemed rehearsed and unnatural. It was clear that Ethan was hiding something, and the evidence, though small, pointed directly to him. It was late one evening, just as the investigation seemed to reach its peak, that Ethan's world came crashing down. Anna had known something was wrong for weeks, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Ethan had become distant, often preoccupied, and increasingly irritable. His late nights at the station were no longer part of the job, but rather part of a secret life he was desperately trying to conceal. Anna had caught the briefest glimpse of his phone, once or twice, just enough to make her heart race in suspicion. She had put her doubts aside, convincing herself that her intuition was wrong. But when she overheard Ethan on a phone call with a colleague, discussing the details of Laura's case, something in her snapped. Anna felt a surge of dread wash over her as the realization hit. She had known deep down that Ethan was hiding something from her, but now it was undeniable. The whispers, the changes in his behavior, it all made sense. Laura wasn't just another officer. Ethan had been lying, not only about the affair but about his involvement in the case from the very beginning. Driven by a mix of hurt and betrayal, Anna's emotions swirled in a storm of confusion and anger. She couldn't bear the thought of confronting Ethan directly, so she turned to her only remaining option. She contacted a lawyer who advised her to confront Ethan but to record the conversation. The night of the confrontation, Anna was a bundle of nerves, but her resolve was unwavering. She waited until Ethan returned from the station, trying to appear as though everything was normal. But as soon as the door closed behind him, she knew it was time. Anna presented the evidence she had gathered: the phone records, the text messages, the growing tension, and waited for Ethan's reaction. For a moment, Ethan tried to deny it. He brushed off the accusations as misunderstandings, even suggesting that Anna was overthinking everything. But Anna was unyielding. She pushed harder, demanding the truth, and finally, Ethan cracked under the pressure. He broke down, his defenses crumbling like sandcastles against a rising tide. He admitted to the affair with Laura. He confessed to the pregnancy. But when he saw Anna's face, the coldness in her eyes, he froze. It was in that moment, looking at the woman he once loved, that Ethan realized the full extent of his actions. His confession, however, did not offer relief. It only deepened the wound between them. Anna's heart shattered. Betrayed, humiliated, and angry, she no longer knew the man standing before her. She had to make a decision, one that she knew would change everything. She could not remain silent, not after what he had done. Anna took a deep breath and made the painful choice. She would report him to the authorities. Her voice was steady, though it quivered with emotion. "I'm not going to cover for you. You'll face the consequences of your actions. You've ruined everything." The following morning, as Ethan sat in his patrol car outside the station, his mind was in a daze. He felt like he was walking through a fog, unable to grasp the reality of what had happened. His phone buzzed, his heart dropped when he saw the name on the screen. It was his commanding officer, requesting him to report to the station immediately. As Ethan entered the precinct, he was greeted by an unusual silence. Colleagues who had once been friendly and trusting now looked at him with suspicion. The walls were closing in. He could feel eyes on him as he walked through the hallway, each step heavier than the last. When he reached the office, 2 detectives were waiting for him. They didn't mince words. The arrest was swift, a humiliating blow that stunned everyone who knew him. Ethan Carter, the dedicated officer who had served with pride, was now in handcuffs, facing charges for the murder of his former lover. The community was in shock, unable to reconcile the man they had once admired with the brutal reality of his actions. His colleagues, who had once trusted him, now viewed him as a criminal, a murderer. As he was escorted out of the precinct, his mind raced. Anna had turned him in. His marriage was over, his career ruined, and the life he had worked so hard to build had been shattered in an instant. The truth had finally caught up with him. The judge sentenced Ethan to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The weight of his actions finally bore down on him. The life he had once known, his career, his marriage, his reputation, was gone forever. His colleagues, friends, and family would now only know him as a murderer. The public's trust in him had been shattered, and his identity as a respected police officer was no more. As Ethan was led away in handcuffs, he glanced toward the back of the courtroom. His eyes briefly met Anna's. There was no anger in her gaze, only sadness and resolve. She had seen the man she loved and trusted break before her, and now she had to move on. In the weeks following the trial, Anna found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. She had spent years supporting Ethan, believing in him, and hoping that their marriage could survive the struggles they faced. But the betrayal she had experienced, the lies, and the brutal truth of Ethan's actions had shattered everything she once held dear.